The candles had been burning for 11 minutes. Seo knew this because he had been counting, quietly, in the back of his mind, the way an omega learns to count things when the waiting becomes unbearable. 11 minutes since he'd lit them. 11 minutes since he'd told himself just 5 more for the second time. The small bakery cafe near the Han River was warm and golden with evening light, the kind of light that belonged in photographs, the kind that made everything look like it meant something. His phone screen showed 3 unanswered messages. He didn't send a 4th. The birthday cake was chocolate mousse with a single stripe of raspberry coulis, Dae-hoon's favorite, not his own. He'd ordered it that way without thinking, the way he'd slowly, over 2 years, rearranged all his small preferences around someone else's. He liked vanilla. He was 24 today, and sitting alone with a chocolate cake he didn't even want, and the candles were now at 12 minutes. His scent had gone quiet. Omegas leaked emotion through their scent the way clouds leaked light, involuntarily, in diffuse waves, and right now Ji-yeon was pouring out something thin and grey. The woman at the next table glanced over once, and then looked deliberately away, as people do when they sense they've seen something private. The door chime rang. His head lifted. It wasn't Dae-hoon. It was a man in a black mask and a low-pulled cap, wearing a plain, oversized jacket the color of charcoal, the kind of deliberately unremarkable outfit that, in Seoul's entertainment district, usually meant the exact opposite of unremarkable. The man slipped into the corner booth across the aisle from Ji-yeon, unaware of the cake, unaware of the boy, and immediately pressed himself against the wall as though trying to reduce his own footprint in the world. Ji-yeon looked back at his candles. 13 minutes. The wax had started to drip. His phone lit up. Finally. But it wasn't a call. It was a message. Ji-yeon, I'm sorry. I can't come tonight. I've been thinking about this for a while, and I think it's better if we stop here. You're a good person. I just can't do this anymore. I'm sorry it's today. I really am. He read it once. Then again, slower, as though the words might rearrange themselves into something kinder on the second pass. They didn't. The candles were still burning. He hadn't made a wish yet. He'd been saving it, superstitiously, quietly, for when Dae-hoon arrived, thinking somehow it would mean more if there was a witness. 2 years, and he'd been broken up with over text, on his birthday, in a cafe where he'd ordered the wrong flavor of cake. Don't cry here, he told himself. Not here. Not with the wax dripping and the woman at the next table pretending not to look. He blew out the candles. Smoke curled up in a thin ribbon. He watched it until it disappeared. He didn't make a wish. There didn't seem to be much point. He sat for another 10 minutes because he'd already paid for the table, and leaving felt like admitting something he wasn't ready to admit yet. He cut a small slice of the chocolate cake, tasted it once, and set the fork down. Outside, the river glittered through the window. A couple walked past with their fingers interlocked, laughing at something Ji-yeon would never know. He was so carefully, precisely not crying that his jaw ached from the effort. The man in the corner booth had been on his phone since he arrived, but Ji-yeon noticed, in the peripheral, distracted way you notice things when your mind is otherwise occupied with pain, that the man had gone completely still. Not the relaxed stillness of someone absorbed in a screen. The rigid, held-breath stillness of someone trying not to be found. The cafe door opened. 3 people walked in, 2 men in matching dark coats and a woman with a tablet, all scanning the room with the brisk, efficient energy of people who were looking for something specific and expected to find it. Their gazes swept the cafe in sections. The man in the corner booth made a sound, barely a sound, more like the ghost of one, and sank 2 centimeters lower in his seat. And then, in one fluid, inexplicable motion that Ji-yeon only half registered until it was already happening, the man slid out of his booth, crossed the narrow aisle in a single step, and sat down directly across from Ji-yeon. Ji-yeon stared at him. The man pulled down his mask just enough to reveal a jaw that was, objectively, in the clinical sense, extremely well constructed, and said in a voice that was low and surprisingly steady for someone who had just relocated himself without invitation, "I'm very sorry about this. Please don't react. Can you pretend, just for about 2 minutes, that you know me?" Ji-yeon looked at him, then at the 3 people near the entrance, who were now moving deeper into the cafe, then back at the man. The man's eyes, dark, clear, and holding an expression that was equal parts composure and barely concealed desperation, met his. There was something in them that cut through the fog of Ji-yeon's misery. Sincerity. Raw, unadorned sincerity. This person was genuinely, quietly asking. Ji-yeon, who had just been dumped on his birthday and was running low on reasons to be difficult, said, "Okay." The man reached across and took the second fork from beside the untouched cake. It was a remarkably natural gesture, the kind that implied familiarity, and Ji-yeon watched him do it and thought, "He's done this before." Improvised. Slipped into a scene without a script. The man took a small bite of the chocolate mousse cake as the 3 searchers reached the row of booths and paused at the one beside them. "Excuse me," said one of the men in dark coats, addressing the cafe generally. "Has anyone seen?" "This is incredible," said the man across from Ji-yeon, in a perfectly conversational tone, gesturing at the cake with his fork. "You said chocolate mousse, but I wasn't expecting the raspberry. It's a good combination." Ji-yeon, by some grace of shock-dulled instinct, responded, "I ordered it special. It's my birthday." The man's eyes moved to his face, and something shifted in them, brief and unguarded, there for half a second and then professionally smoothed over. He said, quietly, "Happy birthday." Not performatively. Not for the benefit of the people nearby. Just that. 2 words, simple and direct, and there was something in the quietness of them that landed somewhere unexpected in Ji-yeon's chest. The 3 searchers moved on. The woman with the tablet said something into an earpiece, and they drifted toward the back of the cafe. A silence settled. The man set down his fork. He pulled his mask back up, then seemed to reconsider, and left it down. Without it, he was, Ji-yeon realized, with the slow arriving of a fact he'd been too emotionally exhausted to process, very recognizable. High cheekbones, a particular line of brow, the kind of face that had been reproduced on magazine covers and streaming thumbnails and the sides of buildings. "You're—" Ji-yeon started. "Shin Woo-hyun," the man said. "Yes." A pause. "You didn't react when you agreed to cover for me. Most people either scream or take a photo. I was already having a bad night." Something in Woo-hyun's expression shifted again, a slight softening at the corners of his eyes. "I'm sorry about that. I'll leave you alone now. Thank you." He moved to stand. And Ji-yeon, who had no rational explanation for what he said next, perhaps it was the birthday, the empty chair, the 11 minutes of burning candles and the message that had arrived instead of a person, said, "You can stay if you want. The cake is too much for one person." Woo-hyun looked at him. Really looked, the way an alpha scans a situation before committing to it. Ji-yeon's scent, stripped raw by the evening, was probably legible as a book left open in the rain. He knew that. He didn't particularly care anymore. Woo-hyun sat back down. The cake is too much for one person. 8 words that would, in time, become the sentence they told differently depending on who was asking. They didn't talk much. That was the first surprising thing. Ji-yeon had expected that a famous person would fill silence with himself, deflect, perform, take up room. Instead, Wu Hyun cut careful slices of the cake and ate them with the focused appreciation of someone who had been skipping meals, and the silence between them was, oddly, the most comfortable Ji-yeon had felt all evening. At some point Wu Hyun said, "Did the person you were waiting for come?" "No," Ji-yeon said. "They texted instead." Wu Hyun didn't say "I'm sorry" in the hollow, automatic way most people would. He just nodded, slowly, like he was filing that information somewhere careful. Then he said, "That's a cowardly thing to do." "He's not a coward. He just—" Ji-yeon trailed off. "He just couldn't face it. That's what cowardly means." Ji-yeon looked at him. Wu Hyun met his gaze, not unkindly, and Ji-yeon found, for the first time that evening, the dangerous, unstable pressure behind his eyes beginning to ease. Not because it hurt less, but because someone had said an honest thing. The three people in dark coats left without finding what they were looking for. Afterward, Wu Hyun explained, briefly, without drama, that his management team had been tracking him after he'd slipped away from a press event, and that he'd been running on 43 hours of promotional schedule and had needed, quite desperately, to sit somewhere quiet and eat something that wasn't catered. He told Ji-yeon this matter-of-factly, the way a person tells another person the weather, and Ji-yeon believed him, not because he was famous, but because he smelled exhausted. Alpha pheromones under duress had a particular quality, a frayed edge beneath the dominant note, and Wu Hyun's scent was carrying that quality quietly. Ji-yeon told Wu Hyun, in return, that he was a florist assistant, that he'd been with someone for 2 years, and that the cake was chocolate because he'd forgotten, somewhere in those 2 years, to keep ordering vanilla. He didn't mean it as anything profound. But Wu Hyun was quiet for a moment after he said it, and then said, "I think I understand what you mean." "Do you?" "There's a person I used to call after concerts, before I got signed, just to come down from the adrenaline. I stopped calling eventually, and I don't think I noticed when. The shape of it just filled in." Ji-yeon looked at him. Wu Hyun was looking at the table. "Did you ever tell them that you'd stopped?" "No. I assumed they knew. Maybe they didn't." Wu Hyun looked up. For a moment, the years and the gap and the fact of who they were, a famous alpha and an unknown omega who had shared a cake by accident, receded entirely, and they were just two people sitting with the same quiet, recognizable ache. Then Wu Hyun's phone buzzed 5 times in rapid succession, and the moment passed. He looked at the screen, sighed from somewhere very deep, and began to stand. "I have to go. I'm sorry. Don't apologize. You were good company." Wu Hyun paused. "For a stranger you covered for anyone." He stood there for a moment, mask in hand, and Ji-yeon had the impression of a person genuinely uncertain how to end a conversation, not from awkwardness but from not wanting to. He put the mask on. He pulled his cap down. At the door, he paused and looked back, and even with his face mostly covered, Ji-yeon could read the expression, "I want to say something. I don't know what it is yet." He left without saying it. Ji-yeon sat alone with the rest of the cake. The candles were long cold. The evening had gone dark outside, and the river was a strip of reflected city light. He felt, against all reasonable expectation, marginally less destroyed than he had at 13 minutes. The flower shop was called Sodam, which meant something between plain conversation and the kind of talk that costs nothing and means everything. It was narrow and warm, tucked between a dry cleaner and a jiggy restaurant on a street that the city's busier arteries had mostly forgotten, and it smelled in the mornings like cold water and green stems and the soft, clean wrought edge of chrysanthemums. Ji-yeon had worked there for 3 years. He was good at it, not brilliant in the way that makes people famous, but the quiet kind of good that keeps shops running. He knew which flowers held and which ones lied. He knew how long each arrangement had before it started lying to itself about being alive. 5 days after his birthday, a man in a mask and cap walked into Sodam. Jion was elbow-deep in a bucket of dahlias and looked up, and something in his chest made a sound like a floorboard settling. "Hi," said Shin Woo-hyun. "Hi," said Jion. "A beat. I didn't know you worked here specifically," Woo-hyun said, which was either entirely true or an excellent lie, and Jion decided immediately not to investigate which. "I need flowers. You're in the right place for that." Woo-hyun moved through the shop slowly, looking at things. Not the way customers usually looked, assessing and selecting, but the way a person looks when they're somewhere they find genuinely peaceful. He touched the edge of a dried eucalyptus bundle. He looked at a small arrangement of white ranunculus without buying it. He was wearing the same plain jacket, and he still smelled frayed at the edges, but there was something slightly more settled in his bearing than there had been on the birthday night. "Roses," he said eventually. 12. Something that doesn't look like an apology. "Are they for an apology?" "No. They're for my grandmother. She turns 80 next week." Jion considered. He pulled soft coral roses, not red, not pink, something warmer and less formulated than either, and wove them with small sprigs of lisianthus and a few stems of Italian ruscus, low and green and grounding. He worked with the focused quietness he always worked with, and Woo-hyun stood at the counter and watched him, and did not fill the silence. It was, again, a comfortable silence. Jion noticed this again, filed it away. He tied the arrangement with raw linen ribbon and set it on the counter. "These say you are still beautiful and you always will be," Jion said. "More or less." Woo-hyun looked at the flowers, then at him. "You're good. I know flowers." Woo-hyun paid. He didn't move to leave. Instead he was quiet for a moment, holding the wrapped arrangement with some care, and then he said, "Can I ask you something strange?" "How strange?" "Strange enough that I want to explain it properly first, so you understand it's not." He paused, seemed to reorganize. "It's not a bad thing I'm asking." Jion set down his shears. "Okay." Woo-hyun looked at the roses in his hands for a moment, as if gathering something. "My grandmother is the person I love most in the world. She's 80. She's been asking me, for the past 3 years, whether there's someone in my life. An omega, she specified, which tells you something about her. And I've been saying soon, Halmoni, soon. And this time she called, and she said that for her 80th, she wanted to meet whoever I was with, and that if I was still alone, she was going to find someone for me herself, and she said it with the cheerfulness of a woman who absolutely means it." He paused. "I'm not in a relationship. I haven't been in a long time. I don't have time, and I'm not." Another pause, more careful. "I'm not very good at it, but I can't say that to her. So I need someone. For 2 days. Just for the birthday weekend, at her house in Gapyeong. Someone who could come with me, be that. And you." He stopped himself. Started again. "You were kind to me in that cafe. You didn't fuss or perform about who I was. You were just a person, and I was just a person, and it was the best 2 hours I'd had in a long time. And I thought, you want me to pretend to be your fiancé," Jion said. Woo-hyun looked at him. "Yes." The flower shop was very quiet. Outside, the dry cleaner's machine tumbled. Jion thought of Dae-hoon, of the message instead of a face, of 2 years of chocolate cake. He thought of the way Woo-hyun had said that's what cowardly means, honestly, without softening it, and of the way the silence between them had felt like rest. He thought, I have nothing losing to lose right now. What are the terms? Woo-hyun blinked. He had, Jion suspected, prepared for negotiation by refusal, not negotiation by terms. He recovered quickly. I'll handle all travel and accommodation. It's one weekend, Friday evening to Sunday afternoon. I'll brief you on anything you need to know. You don't have to lie about yourself, your job, your life, just the part about us. And your grandmother. What's she like? Sharp. Warm. She'll ask you questions about your relationship with your parents. What about you? What about me? What are you like? What do I need to know? Wu Hyun was quiet for a moment. I'm better at working than resting. I forget to eat when I'm busy. I hold conversations better one-on-one than in groups. I like the morning more than I like the night. I can't cook anything except ramen and boiled eggs. Ji-yeon considered all of this seriously. Then he said, I can cook. Just so you know. For the sake of the role. Something moved across Woo Hyun's face. Not quite a smile, or not yet, but the shape that a smile leaves behind. Is that a yes? That's a yes. The drive to Gapyeong took an hour and 40 minutes. Woo Hyun's manager, a mild-mannered man named Juno who treated the entire arrangement with the professional equanimity of someone who had seen stranger things, drove, and Ji-yeon sat in the back seat beside Woo Hyun with a bag on his lap, and the particular alertness of a person walking into a role they've been given very little rehearsal time for. They'd met twice in the week before. Once at the flower shop, where Woo Hyun had given him what he called a reasonable briefing. Basic facts, the grandmother's name, Shin Bokja, the nature of her house, the family dynamics. Once at a cafe where they'd practiced the specific grammar of performing closeness. What to call each other, whether to touch and when, how to answer if someone asked how they'd met. A cafe. Ji-yeon had said. We met in a cafe. That's true. It'll sound thin. The truth usually does, until you've earned the right to tell it. Woo Hyun had looked at him for a long moment after that. You're going to be fine at this, he said, and the way he said it had made Ji-yeon feel obscurely seen. In the car, as Gapyeong's mountains began to appear behind the tree line, Woo Hyun said quietly, She might ask about your scent. What about it? She'll notice that we don't smell bonded. Ji-yeon had thought about this. Long-distance engagement. He said, We haven't formalized it biologically yet. We're being careful. I think that's believable. You've thought about this more than I have. I work with flowers. I think about things that wither if you don't handle them right. Woo Hyun was quiet. Then, what do you smell like, normally, when you're comfortable? It was a strange, intimate question. The kind a person doesn't usually ask until much later. Ji-yeon considered whether to deflect, and decided not to. Paper and cedar. Chrysanthemums sometimes, when I've been working. Rain on asphalt, I've been told. I don't know if that's a compliment. It is. It smells like before something starts. The mountains were closer now. The light was changing, going amber and long. Woo Hyun's hand was resting on the seat between them. Not quite in reach. Almost. Shin Bokja was a small woman with short white hair and eyes like polished river stones. Dark, quick, and giving absolutely nothing away until she chose to. She met them at the door of her house. A proper hanok, renovated carefully, sitting at the edge of a forested hill, and looked at Ji-yeon for a long, measuring moment. Then she said, You're prettier than his last one. Come in. Ji-yeon decided immediately that he loved her. The house was the kind of house that has been lived in with intention, not curated, not arranged for company, but genuinely inhabited. Books doubled on their shelves. A jar of dried persimmon on the kitchen table. Photographs on the wall, most of them of a young Woo Hyun in various states of pre-debut seriousness. his jaw already angular but his eyes still soft in a way they weren't quite now. Jion stood in front of a photo of Wu Hyun at what looked like 12 or 13, holding a microphone at what appeared to be a school event, face bright and completely unguarded, and thought, there he is. There's who he was before the shape filled in. He cried before that performance, said Bokja, appearing at his shoulder. Convinced himself he'd forgotten the words. Did he remember them? Every single one. He always does. A pause. He worries more than he lets on. You know that. I'm learning it, Jion said. Carefully, honestly. Bokja looked at him sideways. He brought you flowers. He's never brought a person flowers before. The reverse, I mean. Did he say I work in a flower shop? He said you know how to read them. That's different. Dinner was doenjang jjigae and grilled fish, and a soup that tasted the way childhood does in retrospect, warm and slightly imprecise. Bokja cooked everything herself, refusing help, and they ate at a low table in the main room with the sliding doors open to the dark hill and the sound of wind in the trees above. Wu Hyun sat close to Jion, not touching, but close enough that Jion was aware of him as a warmth, a presence, a particular weight in the room that his body kept orienting toward the way a plant orients toward a window without being told to. Bokja asked Jion about his family. He answered honestly, a mother in Busan who sent jangoji every autumn, a father who had died when he was 16, a younger sister who was studying marine biology and sent photos of jellyfish. She listened with her full attention, the way old people who have decided life is short do. Then she said, "Do you love him?" Jion set down his spoon, looked at Wu Hyun, who was looking back at him, very still. There were things Jion could have said. Of course, very much, something smooth and performance-shaped. Instead, what came out was, "I think I'm still finding out what that means, with him. But I think whatever it is, it's real." Bokja looked at him, then at Wu Hyun, then back. "That's the most honest answer anyone's ever given me to that question," she said. "I've asked it a dozen times. Everyone else says yes too fast." She poured more barley tea. The wind moved in the trees. Wu Hyun's shoulder, just barely, came to rest against Jion's. Neither of them moved away. The guest room had one bed. Wu Hyun stood in the doorway and looked at it and said, without looking at Jion, "I'll sleep on the floor. I have a blanket. Don't be dramatic. It's a wide bed. I snore. I grew up with a sister who talked in her sleep. I mean it. It's your comfort." "Wu Hyun is a sigh," Jion said, and Wu Hyun went quiet. "It's fine." It was fine. More than fine. Wu Hyun, it turned out, did not snore. He slept the way he did most things, with the focused stillness of someone who, when they allowed themselves to rest, rested thoroughly. Jion lay awake for a while in the dark, listening to the hill and the wind and the quiet breathing of the person beside him, and thought about how strange it was that this room, this unfamiliar room with borrowed blankets and someone else's grandmother asleep across the hall, felt more like somewhere he could breathe than anywhere had felt in a long time. He thought about Dae-hoon. The thought arrived the way most things arrived in the small hours, without armor, direct. He pressed at it gently and found that it hurt less than it had. Not because anything had changed about what happened, but because the thing Dae-hoon had broken, the accumulated invisible self that Jion had been quietly lending out and not getting back, had started, in some small way, to remember what it tasted like to be his own. Vanilla. He liked vanilla. He fell asleep before he meant to. In the morning he woke to the sound of Wu Hyun trying, somewhere in the kitchen, to be very quiet. Failing. The specific clanking sequence of someone opening every cabinet before finding the right one. Jion pulled on his jacket over his sleeping clothes and padded out to find Wu Hyun standing before an open rice cooker with the expression of a person performing forensic investigation. "I can cook," Jion said. Wu Hyun turned. He was wearing a soft grey t-shirt and his hair was flat on one side and his face, without the care of public, was younger. Jion noticed this, filed it somewhere, and came to stand beside him and assess the situation. "Where does your grandmother keep her gonjang?" They cooked together in the small kitchen. Or rather, Jion cooked and Wu Hyun did exactly what he was told and proved surprisingly useful when given instructions. He moved efficiently in small spaces. He didn't bump into things. He handed ingredients without being asked twice. "You're not as helpless as advertised," Jion said. "I'm good at being a second pair of hands. I just can't initiate." Jion considered this. "That's not entirely true, isn't it? You sat down at my table without being asked." Wu Hyun was quiet. That was desperation. Still initiation. The egg was starting to set in the pan. Morning light came through the window above the sink and landed on the counter in a warm strip. Somewhere outside, a bird was making a prolonged, cheerful argument with another bird about something. "Jiona," Wu Hyun said. "The name. Not SSI. Just the name." Jion kept his eyes on the pan. "Yes. I know this is." A pause. Careful. "I know what the terms were. But I want to ask, separately from any of that, whether you'd want to get dinner when we're back in Seoul. Just us. No rolls." The egg was done. Jion slid it onto the plate and turned off the heat and then turned to look at Wu Hyun, who was watching him with the same raw, direct sincerity he'd had in the cafe, the expression that had made Jion say okay to a stranger in the first place. "You should know," Jion said, "that I just got out of something. I don't have a lot of steady ground right now. I know. And you have a complicated life. Time and schedule and all of that. I know that too. And you're asking anyway. I'm asking anyway." Jion set the plate down on the counter. He looked at the morning in the window and thought of flowers, of how you can't force the season, but you can put them in good water and give them the right light and see what they decide to do. "Dinner," he said. "Yes. When we're back." Wu Hyun's expression did the thing it did, not quite a smile, and then finally, quietly, a smile. Bokja appeared in the kitchen doorway, assessed the situation in approximately 2 seconds, and said, "Good. Now, is someone going to bring me my tea, or do I have to be 80 by myself?" The weekend ended the way good things do when you haven't quite prepared yourself for them. Suddenly, cleanly, with a quality of not yet sitting in the chest the whole drive back. Bokja had held Jion's hands at the door, both of them, and said, "Come back in autumn. The maples here are something." He'd said, "I'd like that," and meant it, which was the startling thing. In the car back to Seoul, Wu Hyun sat close again. Not quite touching, but close. The mountains ran backward outside the window. Juno drove and kept his eyes on the road with the discretion of a professional. "How are you feeling?" Wu Hyun asked, quietly enough that it wasn't for the driver. "Strange. Good strange. Same." A pause. "Can I ask you something?" Jion said. "Yes." "When did you stop being afraid of what I'd say?" "You were nervous when you asked me." "In the flower shop." Wu Hyun thought about this. "Around the time you asked what I was like instead of whether I could pay you." Jion turned to look at him. The late afternoon light was moving across Wu Hyun's face, slow and amber. "I wasn't thinking about money." "I know. That's when I stopped being nervous." The city's outer edge began to appear. first the industrial margins, then the apartment blocks, then the denser, familiar maze of mid-city, the river coming into view. Ji-yeon thought. We started with pretending. But somewhere in the kitchen that morning, making eggs while the bird argued outside, it stopped being pretend. It became something that needed a different word. Not yet a word I know, but real. The kind of real that has weight and specific smell and takes up space in a room. He didn't say this. Some things you carry with you until you find the right door to put them down in front of. But Woo-hyun, as they pulled off the highway into the city proper, reached across the seat and touched the back of Ji-yeon's hand. One finger, light, a question without words, and Ji-yeon turned his hand over, palm up. Woo-hyun's hand settled into it. They sat like that, hand in the back seat, the city going past the window, until Juno stopped in front of Sodam and the evening shifted blue. 3 months later, a regular customer at the flower shop noticed that Ji-yeon had started ordering vanilla cakes from the bakery 2 doors down on his lunch breaks. She mentioned it to him because she'd always found the chocolate ones he ordered before oddly at odds with what she could see of his taste. "You just seem like a vanilla person," she said. "I am," Ji-yeon said. The same day, Woo-hyun came by at the end of his schedule, which was, by this point, unremarkable enough to Ji-yeon that he only looked up once to confirm it was him before going back to his trimming. Woo-hyun settled in the chair behind the counter that had, in some unremarked-upon way, become his chair over the months since autumn, and read something on his phone and occasionally remarked on things, and smelled like rain on asphalt and something underneath it that Ji-yeon had come to understand, specifically, as at rest. He stayed until closing. They went for ramen. Not a date, technically, though the distinction had blurred past usefulness a while ago, and walked back along the river in the November cold, close enough that their shoulders kept meeting. Ji-yeon said, "I've been thinking." "Okay." "About what your grandmother said in autumn. About coming back for the maples. We could go. I have a weekend. I know. I want to go." A pause. "But I want to go as ourselves this time. Not any role." Woo-hyun stopped walking. Ji-yeon stopped a step ahead and turned back. The river was black and silver beside them. The city hummed its continuous low note. Woo-hyun's face was lit from below by the walkway lamps, and he was looking at Ji-yeon with the expression he'd had in the café. Open, sincere, completely unguarded, except now there was something steadier under it. Something that had had time to become certain of itself. "We were ourselves," Woo-hyun said quietly. "We were always ourselves. That was the only true part." Ji-yeon looked at him, thought of 11 minutes and burning candles and a message instead of a face, of coral roses and a kitchen in Gapyeong and a hand that asked before it held, of all the months between then and now, the careful, unhurried growing toward that good things do when you put them in the right light and don't rush them. He closed the step between them. "Okay," he said, the same word as the beginning, but rounder now. Fuller, meaning something that took 3 months to grow into. Woo-hyun's arms came around him, and Ji-yeon pressed his face against the warmth of his shoulder, and the city went on around them, indifferent and beautiful, the river full of reflected light. Above them, November kept the sky clear and the stars faint. Somewhere, a birthday cake sat in a café window, its candles unlit, waiting for someone to make a wish worth making. Some wishes, it turns out, don't need words. They need time, and the right stranger sitting down across from you in the dark.